What's up, geeks and gamers? It's Odin coming back with a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Avatar 2 passing $2.2 billion just as Titanic in 3D was re-released. And of course, the conversation over worldwide charts all-time records continues to be had between these two films. And of course, typical to Deadline and typical to other mainstream news and media outlets, especially with Nancy over here at Deadline, they continue to ignore for inflation. So we're going to talk about what the actual numbers look like based on the original run of Titanic. That is sometimes a thing that people bring up is, well, you can't really compare the two movies because, you're including all of the re-releases. Well, luckily we have Box Office Mojo, which is not the most perfect site. It does make mistakes from time to time, but one thing it does do is it does hold to the original runs of various films, and so we can actually make some pretty good comparisons because of that very thing. So we'll talk about that. We'll also, of course, talk about how Magic Mike's Last Dance won the weekend, which really isn't all that impressive. This is probably one of the worst weekends actually we've seen in a very long time, which makes sense. It is Super Bowl weekend, so many people are focused on either traveling for the Super Bowl or traveling to visit family, because it typically is a pretty massive event where people just spend time with each other, whether they like football or not. And so this was, again, to be expected for this film, and all the films really to not do very well, including Avatar: Way of Water, even though it is still having some pretty strong holds percentage-wise. But we also have the second weekend numbers for 80 for Brady and Knock at the Cabin. So let's go ahead and dive into these numbers. As again, I said, Magic Mike's Last Dance, $8.2 million. Only released in around 1,500 screens, though. And that was actually a bit surprising, seeing that this is a Warner Brothers release. You would expect that this film would get a much wider release. Steven Soderbergh has once again returned to the franchise. He did the first film, which actually was a pretty well-made movie. The second film, I just skipped out on because it wasn't done by Soderbergh, and it seemed a little bit more like the Beefcake kind of movie that the first film seemed to be. Right? All the trailers for the first film very much did not do that film justice as far as marketing. It was marketed as a Beefcake film. It ended up being just a good Steven Soderbergh film, as he is known for making very good films. And then the second film was like, oh, let's go ahead and, kind of move away from that formula and instead just give you the Beefcake movie. At least that's the premise that, as far as I understand, the film is, because I have yet to actually see that film. Magic Mike's Last Dance, actually, I have some intrigue in seeing, but again, it would be something where I would feel the need to watch the second film out of just the completionist that I am, and I don't really want to do that. So anyway, $8.2 million, though, in its opening weekend, though this film cost a decent amount. So this film's going to have to, again, just like with almost all the Warner Brothers releases, is going to have to do so much better than what is actually going on. And so I just do not quite understand what Warner Brothers is doing when it comes to the releases of their movies, because they either are doing things like this, where a film that they should probably have a wider release for, I imagine maybe maybe the thought process was, hey, Avatar, Titanic, all these other films are gonna, dominate the space, or at least have a bigger footprint in the space. It's the, Super Bowl weekend. Let's not go ahead and release everything all at once. Let's go ahead and release it, see if we can get some positive word of mouth. And then next weekend, which will coincide with, obviously, Valentine's Day weekend, not Valentine's Day itself, as that will be during the week, but the Valentine's Day weekend concept, right, of more couples going out. Maybe that's what they're going for, to say, okay, we're going to add another 1,500 screens or so next week. It wouldn't surprise me if they did that. And again, that might actually change the prospects of this film. But as of right now, it is, as I said, Super Bowl weekend, so a little bit hard to tell, similar to what we were talking about earlier in December, when Avatar: Way of Water and also even that of Puss in Boots were coming out, and their weekends were matching up with Christmas and with New Year's. Again, those numbers ended up being way off because of the lack of people going to the theaters on those days in comparison to other weekends during that holiday frame. And we've seen both of those films be chart breakers in different ways. And so we're going to go ahead and give the same type of leeway for Magic Mike, but it is definitely not the strongest result, definitely not the strongest weekend and strongest numbers that it probably was hoping for. And it does still raise the questions about Warner Brothers. Maybe next weekend it'll make up for it, but in my experience, typically, when it comes to opening weekends, you want to have the biggest opening weekend possible, and right now they don't seem to really be doing that. Avatar: Way of Water, though, is now back in the top 3. I said that there was a chance that the film could actually get edged out by Titanic's re-release or by 80 for Brady, which been Friday to Friday. If you look at those numbers, right, the Friday numbers were definitely up there. But as I've mentioned previously, and I mentioned this on OMB Reviews as well in my update or in my preview for the weekend, I was saying, hey, if you're looking at these Friday numbers, though, do not be deceived, because people sometimes look at the Friday drop-offs, for instance, right, of a brand new release from week 1 to week 2, and they say, oh, it dropped 89%. that does not really mean all that much when you don't have the Saturday numbers yet. And this is something that I was not surprised by. Avatar, of course, did much better on Saturday than 80 for Brady or Knock at the Cabin. And so that is how it was able to pull ahead. And right now, the projections for Sunday are looking pretty good for it too. And so it's back in the top 3, not back in the number 1 spot. And it probably won't hit the number 1 spot anymore or at any other point in its release because it has been out for a very long time. So it's not necessarily a terrible thing for not to ever hit number 1 again. But it does, I think, send a big message as far as where this film's domestic number will end up when everything is said and done, especially in comparison to Top Gun Maverick. As you know, I've been covering that, especially a lot on my channel, OMB Reviews. And if you want a fuller box office breakdown, including that and some other comparisons, go ahead and check out that video. That's how I'll be recording today as well. Probably get out before this video, if I had to guess, based off of, again, so many things going on in the news cycle, and I don't ever know when the box office video for Geeks and Gamers gets released. And so hopefully it gets released around the same time. If not, hey, future self or past self, whatever it might be. Anyway, 80 for Brady, though, coming in at the number 4 spot. Actually, Titanic coming in at the number 3 spot, $6.4 million. So this was back when Paramount and also 20th Century Studios, or rather at that time 20th Century Fox, both were co-distributing, co-working on the film. And so it's going to be interesting to see exactly, since this is a Paramount release, right, as far as the actual money is concerned from any extra money that it makes, how much of it goes back to Paramount, how much of it goes to 20th Century, which would be, of course, now owned by Disney. It'll be interesting to say nonetheless. The 25th anniversary, though, release in 3D explains why we're seeing, I think, as high numbers. Obviously, this is a very popular film, and a lot of people are going to see it. I'm not going to deny that fact. But we also have to remember that this film is, I believe, exclusively re-released in 3D, because this is something that James Cameron is just obsessed with and wants to push. So that means the average ticket price for Titanic is going to be a lot higher in today's market. So it actually puts it up very much head-to-head with Avatar, as Avatar has also been dominating the 3D marketplace and the premium ticket marketplace. And again, I believe there were some IMAX showings of Titanic as well. And so makes sense for this film to be doing as well as it is. But hey, kudos to James Cameron for having 2 films in the top 3 of the box office. One film having been out for an exceptionally long time. The other film coming back after 25 years, after several re-releases. You wouldn't expect a film like this necessarily, right on paper, without knowing the name Titanic and James Cameron, of course, to do this well. But for a weekend like this, it was the perfect weekend for them to be able to pull this out. And again, over 2,000 screens as well. We'll see how much they're able to push forward going in the weeks ahead and how long it's going to be in re-release. We also had the number 4 spot, 80 for Brady. That's right, 80 for Brady. Expected this film to do a little bit better, seeing that this is a football-themed movie, though again, it is also about a bunch of old women who are thirsty for Tom Brady. At least that's what the trailer makes it out to be. So who knows exactly where it will be when all is said and done there. And then coming in the number 5 spot, interestingly enough, they have 5 and 6 in opposite positions, but also they are thinking that Puss in Boots is going to end up being number 5 over Knock on the Cabin when the actuals come out. Right now, they're projecting both at $5.5 million, and so that's going to be interesting to see what the actuals are when we get those on Monday or Tuesday, and which film actually will end up being edging out the other. Obviously, though, Knock on the Cabin adding 14 screens, having a 61% drop from week 1 to week 2. Is not a great position for that movie, though because the film didn't cost nearly as much, it's in a pretty decent position, whereas Puss in Boots continues to add money and is actually closing in on $400 million worldwide. Talking about some of those worldwide numbers, Magic Mike's Last Dance coming in at $18.6 million. Avatar Way of Water is up to $2.2 billion. So again, very impressive numbers there. 4.8 times its budget, at least according to the $460 million budget that was reported, and it likely was probably higher than this based on what James Cameron himself has indicated about so-called break-even numbers, right? He kind of waffled back and forth between essentially what implied 1.5 to 2 billion being the break-even. Clearly, this film was able to make that very easily and is be able to make a lot of profit. I'm going based off of the 460, and right now this film has made a lot of money for Disney because of that very fact. Looking at the domestic numbers, though, as I said, because we're seeing a slowdown in the weekly performance, and this makes sense, right? Top Gun Maverick had a summer release, and so therefore had a little bit, I guess, better position in that regard. But still, when you're this far out in the release, and now you're not only to see the daily numbers go to Top Gun Maverick, but also the weekend numbers, and obviously this being a much weaker weekend compared because of the Super Bowl, yeah, right now you see Top Gun Maverick is actually catching up with a lot of ground. So right now this film, right, made at the same point in its release, Top Gun Maverick made an extra, 6, rounding up to 7, another 10, so a little over $10 million for this film, made around 6, so it had about a $4 million advantage. It's been having the daily advantage. I've already talked about this in another video on my channel, that basically the film, Avatar 2, reaching 718,000 on a daily number, that it was another 2 weeks or so before you saw a similar result from Top Gun Maverick. And so it's showing that right now the long-term legs, domestically at the very least, seem to be edging towards Top Gun Maverick. And so there are some who are even speculating this film may not even reach $700 million domestically when it is all said and done, especially when you have films like Ant-Man Quantumania coming out and other films set to come out, major releases set to come out in March and April. And so, hey, this film still made a lot of money, still made a crap ton of money, in fact. But again, it'll be fun to see, and I really hope it ends up being the case, to see if Top Gun Maverick is at the very least able to be the number one film domestically at the box office, whereas Titanic, or I was to say Titanic, very similar film in certain ways, Avatar 2, The Way of Water, will easily be the top grossing film worldwide of the entire year. Now, also, I did want to put a little bit of a comparison up between Titanic and Avatar, The Way of Water, again, because there are talk about, the records and all these other things, and then people, of course, get triggered every time I mention the word inflation. But here's some very important facts, right? If you look at this chart right here, this is the with adjusted for inflation on, it says $4.4 billion versus $2.2 billion. And so to say that this film is anywhere near the actual amount that Titanic made in today's dollars is just not true. It's just not accurate. Now, some will say, but that includes all of these other releases. Okay, well then let's go to the original release. Thank you, Box Office Mojo. So in the original release of Titanic, it made $600 million domestically, $1.2 billion internationally, for a total of $1.8 billion. And that was back in 1997. I went ahead and did the math for everybody just so that everyone can understand exactly what's going on. When it comes to these movies, right? When it comes to these films' domestic numbers, if you look at Avatar 2, obviously $620 million. It's obviously gone up since that point in time. But you're dealing with the film, right? That's now at $646 million domestically versus the $1.1 billion. This is when you adjust for inflation of Avatar 1. So as you can see, the 785 times 1.41 based off of BLS. This is, again, an American, this is a government website that can tell you exactly what the inflation rate is comparatively between years. So what this film, what the first Avatar film made was $1.1 billion. There's no way Avatar 2 is going to get to that number. What Titanic was able to make domestically was $1.12 billion. So even Titanic still has a higher overall gross domestically than even the first Avatar film, as big as that movie was. What's amazing is that when you take the total numbers, right, of the original run, you're looking at $3.4 billion. Now, some would say, what about exchange rates and what about different countries? Well, remember, those exchange rates are already accounted in when you get those numbers being reported. It's reported in what currency? Dollars. So therefore, the only adjustment for inflation you need to do is for the American dollar, because that is how the numbers are actually being reported. Look at this. Again, $600 million versus international $1.2 billion, worldwide 1.8. Here is the math for you. And again, if you hate math and you hate inflation, I got news for you. Too bad. Anyway, 80 for Brady at $24 million domestically. Knock at the Cabin at $36.7 million. Puss in Boots at $393, getting pushed all the way close to $400 million. Also, again, we're doing a little bit of charting because we like to do charting for those two films in their second week of release. With Knock at the Cabin at $36 million, I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between either $52 million or $44 million. And obviously, this will actually, hold on one second. Let me go ahead and fix this real quick. There we go. That's much better. All right, so between $52 and $73 million by the end of its run, whereas 80 for Brady is expected to make somewhere between $35 and $49 million based off of typical historical standards. Now, the budget for Knock at the Cabin was around $20 million. For 80 for Brady was around $28 million. And so because of that, based on the numbers that we're seeing, I'm projecting that Knock at the Cabin probably has a decent chance, especially with these numbers being lower because of the Super Bowl weekend anyway, of making at least $1.5 to $14 million. So this film will be yet another film that is able to make money for M. Night Shyamalan. Not a whole lot of money, but hey, still, money is money. Whereas 80 for Brady, which was doing much better than what many people expected, right now it's projected to lose money. So somewhere between $20 and $12 million in financial losses, though of course, as I said, this will ultimately have to be taken with the same, or rather at the very least a similar caveat as to what we did back in December with the holiday weekends and with the Christmas and New Year's weekends, because sometimes those can mess these things up. And so next weekend I think we'll get a better idea of just how well this film is tracking. And that's one of the reasons also why I tend to also do percentage based compared to its first 2 weeks. So for instance, Plane has actually doubled the amount of money it's made in the first 2 weeks. It's still not enough to push this film to the point of being able to be, an actual break even, but still it is definitely a lot closer than what it initially had been. Whereas Magic Mike's Last Dance, as I had mentioned, actually cost a decent amount of money, at least comparatively, right? $47 million budget means the break even point, though, is around $117.5 million, starting out at 18.6 worldwide. Not a very good start, But of course, next weekend, I think, will ultimately be a much bigger help with it. And because it'll be the second weekend numbers, any of those numbers lost from this weekend likely will be made up over the course of this week and over the course of next weekend, and so we'll be able to do a fuller breakdown of those numbers. But these are the numbers as they currently stand. So what are y'all's thoughts? Have you seen Magic Mike's Last Dance? Do you think it's any good? And then also, what are y'all's thoughts about the whole Avatar Titanic thing? Again, there is no denying the fact that it is very, very impressive for these two films from James Cameron to be massive money makers. Like, that is, again, if you're going to take anything from any of it, these are both films that made a crap ton of money. But as you can see, hopefully now that I've broken it down a little bit further, and hopefully explain myself a little bit more too. Again, when you have two James Cameron films, which one are you can take the side of, people? If you're a James Cameron fan in any way, I mean, when you talk about all-time worldwide charts, and these are, of course, charts that are not accounting for inflation, and yet inflation is such an important concept itself because it is what gives us a better understanding of ticket sales, right? We don't have a good metric on actual ticket sales, and so I've actually had to, compare it. But as you can see right here, if you go ahead and compare the average ticket price in 1997, which was around $4.59 per ticket, you're looking at 244 million tickets sold versus Avatar's 98 million. And this was the last update, so it's actually gone up since then, though, of around 70 million tickets sold for Avatar 2. And so that's the reason why adjusting for inflation is so important, because we don't get these exact numbers, right? We have to guess, okay, what is the average ticket price? How can we then look into it? And that's just from the domestic numbers. That is not even looking into the international numbers themselves, because internationally, those ticket prices are going to be all over the place, amongst many other things. And so that is the reason why I adjust for inflation. And if that word continues to trigger you, too bad. Anyway, make sure you smash the like button, light the fire button, and honestly smash the rumble button wherever you're watching us, Freakies and Gamers. Also, if you have not yet voted in the Wednesday Raven Awards, we are now at 199 people that have responded. So this is already a record breaking for me, at least. Again, since I've been doing this 5 years now, it's great just to have people involved with it. If you want to vote for the best films of the year, these were films nominated by you, the people, for those that did actually nominate. So if you want to vote on that, also for Shill of the Year, of which Jeremy is actually a nominee up against John Campia, make sure you check out my channel, OMB Reviews, and find a link for that so that you can get your votes in. And you have about a month or so left to vote, as I will be closing them probably around March 10th to get ready for the Oscars boycott, which is the Raven Awards. Anyway, you guys are amazing, beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.